We are second time. We had a previous episode all about physique enhancement in terms of developing a better physique through a gaining phase. We're going to be going now on the other side of this journey, which is losing body fat and successfully doing this in the best way possible with John Jewett and myself. Sometimes we have certain things that we may not be able to accomplish or overcome, but when it comes to having some deadlines or you really want to get the best out of your physique after you have gone built your body, now what's next? And it is that cutting phase and getting ready for it. So the first one is going to be a few questions around dieting. And the second part is going to be fun because it's an underrated, overrated part. I will show you or give you a statement or a word around what is this under or overrated, and I want you to tell me what is your opinion and a bit of a rationale of why you think that is. I could start with just a few questions around dieting. And the first one I wanted to ask you, what would be your best recommendation or your best tips for managing hunger during fat loss phase? Looking for strategies beyond what we already know. Okay, we know eating high volume, high fiber, high protein, but are there strategies you have actually used with your clients or with yourself when prepping when calories are super, super low and you really want to be compliant and successful through your fat loss phase?
I think like before you're entering in, like, of course, like for many people watching this, they might not be going all the way through the rigors of a contest prep phase to where you're getting to the extreme part of lean body fat, low body fat, where it's going to be unavoidable uncomfortability. And I think that's needs that expectation set because it's going to be there in some degree. Like some people are okay with hunger. Other people are really fatigued from cardio or something, but to get to the extreme level of body fat, you're like signing up for something that's going to challenge and push you. So we absolutely want to try to mitigate the perception of that deficit if we can and allow someone to see out their goal of fat loss and get to the stage. But at some point, there's clients where like, man, it does come across as, I hate to use the word suffering because you're choosing to do this and there's actually true suffering in the world. I don't think of a contest prep as suffering, but there's going to be quite a degree of uncomfortability that you're signing up for. But also, I think it's important to manage that because there's people out there like, this is it, suck it up. Like, this is the diet you're going to follow. I think it's important to have those strategies and try to work with your client the best that you can, because reducing that perception of effort is, for one, a reduction in the mental stress component, which just the actual mental stress itself eats away at the recovery tank to where of how hard you can push someone and get them leaner. Also, that stress accumulation too could impact sleep. And then someone's getting poor quality sleep. They also might be waking up more, and they also might just be getting hungry during sleep, and that's causing them. So it's like dual-sided, right? Fatigue's building up, poor sleep, but also hunger might be driving them to get up and wake up as well. And then what does poor sleep cause? Well, more hunger, more cravings, and then that makes fatigue even worse. It's like a terrible snowball effect that happens. So I think it's really important that you don't brush off the idea of trying to reduce that perception of a deficit for your client when you're able to do so, because a lot of these people are able to see it out farther before they reach that roadblock where I've had clients where you just simply can't push them harder because the adherence part becomes a real issue, or the fatigue part. They just can't handle the deficit level. But anyway, back to the actual, like, what's the strategy? So I think before you enter into that stage, I do like to run like a pre-prep phase, which there's all kinds of names for it, right? Some people call it a holding phase or a primer phase or whatever, what have you. So a transition period from the off season to your prep to start putting in that routine and strategy to make you have a successful fat loss phase. And a few things that would be transitioning someone from like they've been more flexible to something more structured that we can be regimented with in prep. Also, I think it starts removing some of the really hyper palatable foods that might have been present, and keeping those in can drive people to have more cravings too. So obviously, you make your food a little bit more bland, it actually won't create that sensation to want more of those foods as well. So that's part of that phase. Also, I do like moving people. This is something that I just a preference thing for me, is moving to less meals per day.
Mhm.
And I find it just a lot easier to just fast a little bit longer in the morning. And also, like in prep, you're having to do cardio now or posing, and then you know I'll do a lot of that in the morning, and my meals get pushed back. So I can have food to where I'm not having long bouts without eating, or like really small amounts of foods frequently. So it's kind of a preference thing, but that's something that you might weigh out with clients with having like meal frequency versus food volumes. I know you brought up, food volumes. Before I keep rambling, do you want me to is there anything you want to answer between there?
No, I think it is awesome that you're talking about that. And I guess is bringing also the point of mindset and expectations, and probably knowing that you're going to be a little hungry. But my question then would be, how hungry should you get, or how much is too much in order for you to say, maybe I am in a very steep deficit and it may not be as beneficial for me, or could this put at risk to your stress levels, to your sleep, to affect all the aspects that could ruin somehow your progress or your adherence at some point? Because if you're having a super low deficit, let's say you're really, really low in calories, how do you ensure you can still do everything you're meant to do in terms of output? You have to still do your resistance training at some amount of intensity and productivity, and you also have to go and do your cardio. So where do you get that energy if you're in a super deficit and you're trying to create this big gap in between to obviously dry out even more and look more shredded? But what is a happy medium when we're trying to achieve that?
That is a hard one to strike for a lot of people. I know it's like the happy medium. So honestly, that for some people, that's just not even going to exist.
Yeah.
Just to be honest, like you might have that person that's just feels like they're starving all day, and you look at their cardio and it's sky high, and they have to have very low food, and for them to get to that lean division requirement, it's so far beyond their like body fat set point and what their physiology's wanting them to be at, that it just takes a lot to get there. And how long would you keep someone in that phase before you're like, all right, this isn't worth pursuing anymore? It's going to have to weigh into that individual's, I guess, big why of, are you doing it and it's giving you some satisfaction in the process to see out this outcome. I think that's a big problem in the early on client where they might not know what to report back,
Mm-hmm.
or it's inaccurate because they've never even experienced that level of hunger before, to where it's like really not that bad. But it's new to them. So I think for one, the main thing of getting on stage is that body fat condition has to be there. So you're going to have to allow and accept detriments in other areas. So that might be training performance. It might be like you're not going to have very good training anymore. It's just kind of getting the job done. So with that, I also make sure, like with clients, I'm like monitoring the logbook in their gym performance, and we're seeing if they're able to at least maintain, or if some things are starting to drop off, we might have to accept that. And that could be the way it just goes. Like you might just keep losing training performance on the tail end of this prep. like how much sleep detriment is acceptable. It's like, well, is this a hobby or is this a career? Because if this is now taking away from like your productivity and your actual career, your actual job, maybe that's not even acceptable. And to where like this pursuit for that physique and just getting on stage, it's too much of a trade-off for what you need down your other life and area, or it could be relationship based. And then you'd even have to weigh in too, like this is more for the newer client, like what does this look like after the show, right? Because if you have someone that's that hungry, because I've had people that like where you make changes and it's just like there's such a small deficit in the degrees of physique improvement are just not happening because you can't generate enough deficit. It's almost best to like put them on stage earlier on, like find an earlier show, like, hey, this is the physique that we have for now. Or if that's not acceptable, then we pull back because they're not meeting that requirement of what they want to look like on stage. And there's just no tools left to play. And to keep going week after week without seeing like major improvements, that's the type of client that I've seen post-show. It's just ravenous eating afterwards, and the food focus was so high, and that dopamine rush, like after having like good hyperpalatable foods, it just becomes like uncontrollable. So that's the person that like overshoots body fat gain after the show, and it might just take them out from even competing again, honestly, or take a year to come back to a position where they could even repeat that process. So it's something you need to consider over just putting a physique on stage for your coaching profile, and what does the long term look like for that person. It's just a lot of like feedback you'll have to gain and perspective around monitoring like their subjective feedback of what they're telling you, trying to watch some of the objective markers and pick up on cues that might present that person with that risk for the post show. So yeah, it's a lot to it. It's a very subjective area, right? Of when is it too much, but realize I think that's your coaching job at the front end to make sure you really set the expectation of that this is gonna be a lot. So make sure you do pull back in the areas where you have the ability to make room for how encompassing this type of prep would be. And I think a lot of people just don't even realize it. So I think we are speaking more to like the earlier on competitor.
Now, I have a really interesting question that just popped in my mind. And when we are talking about dealing with hunger, have you noticed any different responses from clients that are using steroids or enhanced versus the natural clients around managing hunger? So in terms of like, are this using steroids affecting somehow the capability to manage hunger better, or has pretty much neutral effect?
It is, it's an interesting question. Like, at least if you looked across like the studies with steroid use, and even what I've seen subjectively, like anecdotally from clients, that usually when steroids do increase, there is usually like an increase in hunger, and that's what I've seen across the board. There's also, I was just talking with another client. You do have kind of this increase in feeding efficiency. So like you could be on the same diet that was like maintaining body weight, maintaining body fat, and you have an increase of these steroids, and all of a sudden someone will start dropping body fat and even gaining muscle at the same time. So like that same food is now ability to start repartitioning, and that just drop in body fat could increase signaling for hunger. Now, whether there's some type of like direct impact on like, ghrelin and CCK and all these hunger hormones, I don't know. I've never dug in that far. Now, the other thing is it depends on which kind of steroid that's being used, because like oral steroids, the way that they're methylated in the liver, they need to pass through the liver, and the liver has to survive this metabolism. So to do so, that's why they put on this altered group, and it is pretty liver toxic, but in turn it can cause a decrease in appetite. So this is why like a lot of guys in the off season, they try not to use these oral steroids because it can really make appetite low, but in a contest prep, it could also make appetite lower. Now, this is a terrible reason to use that. So it's never a strategy. It just happens that occurs. I've seen people like make the rationale for it, but I would always say, like, if you have a tool to use like that, make sure it's the main purpose of that tool. So we don't want to just take a liver toxic drug because it's going to decrease your appetite when that main tool of a steroid is to maintain muscle tissue. So let's say you use enough to retain your muscle tissue. Let's not use these toxic compounds for hunger mitigation. I think you bring up another interesting question around just drug use in general, because with enhanced physique competition, like there is nothing off the table really. So there's been a lot of like new drugs that came about for hunger management, like semaglutide or Ozempic, or whatever you want to call it, the GPL-1 agonists. All these weight loss clinics are making this available, at least here in the US. And so everyone's jumping to it, and people are using it in contest prep because it does drastically decrease hunger. Now, I did a big podcast on this, so long story short, like I'm not a proponent on it because I think you need to be able to teach strategies that can be long-term and sustainable. So see out a prep, because otherwise you might be masking a very poor put together nutrition training program by just using something like that. So it has its place, but at least in contest prep, again, I think you're signing up for this, so we shouldn't use any drug on the table to make the job happen. Just because the idea of, like, for one, polypharmacy, you have people that are using 10, 12 different drugs together. Who knows what all the long-term implications around that, even though seemingly like one drug might be very benign, in combination over long term, you don't know. So at least something like that around hunger management, I think there is still a lot that we can do to manage someone. And I'll say, Astrid, like the biggest game changer for myself was preparing my lifestyle for competition, because I was the one that, being younger, and even starting out in work, like I worked as a dietitian, like, my 8 to 5 in the hospital. Then I was coaching people on the side, and then I was having to do like cardio 2 times a day because I didn't know to even stay active. So I was end up being very sedentary all day, having to make up for it through higher amounts of cardio. And then it was a schedule of like, you wake up and you go all day long, and then your head hits the pillow, and you repeat the day. So there was no like stress management either. And that was just an accumulation of fatigue. And that fatigue made everything feel so hard. Like cardio was like going to war. The hunger was crazy high. And then I wasn't accounting for a decrease in just daily activity either. So I was like, gosh, why am I getting even lower in food? And I'm hitting these fat loss stalls. So come full circle, it's like I shouldn't have been working that much to do a contest prep. I know that's a luxury that many might not have. Like, so for now, like I pull back on my client load when I'm going into prep, and I'm also very cognizant. Like I'm sitting now, but I have a walking desk treadmill under my desk to keep up my step count. So now I keep my food higher because my energy flux is high. In other words, like my daily activity is high, so I can eat more. That was a game changer for me. Just staying more active and not letting that NEAT drop down. And that what was happening so much. And then making up for it for very fatiguing cardio, which just makes another issue with like sleep getting poor and the perception of everything's harder, right? Like your training sessions are harder because you're tired. You're not sleeping as well, so that makes everything feel more tired. So that was the game changer for me, around just fatigue management, making my deficit much, for one, a lower perception of effort, but also actually being able to truly eat more in prep.
I love that.
And I think it is so important what you said of trying to accommodate for what is going to be coming, and you're adjusting your lifestyle to reduce fatigue management and trying to optimize as much as possible what you can within the possibilities of your life. Now, for someone who is needing to go to a lower calories, especially I see this in female athletes, they at some point, especially if the timing is a little bit constrained for their prep, let's say they have to do a prep shorter compared to someone who can have the luxury to do a longer prep, you probably have to be a little bit more aggressive. So in terms of being a little bit more aggressive with shorter preps, or just when you have to pull the trigger to make things a little bit more aggressive for the sake of having a more specific result for what you're looking for, maybe for your division or for just for the sake of aesthetics, how low can you actually go without risking so much your lean body mass in a fat loss phase when you're prepping for the show? And whether do you use any particular calculation or approach? Like I usually try to calculate a calorie floor, but I try to not get our clients below that number, which is estimated depending on their lean body mass. And like for energy availability, 22.5 kilocalories per lean body mass. But what is your approach, or what do you use, or what is your advice when it comes to this specific question in terms of how low can you go without putting that at risk, your lean body mass?
Is that the most important thing for the client, right? Like, hey, I want to do this show, but my most important thing is not losing lean body mass. And that might take the planned direction away from what it really needs to be focused on, right? Which is making sure you just get lean. And some lean body mass might very well happen. So I have that absolutely, like I have that in consideration, but my number one is just still going to be making sure body fat fully pulls off completely. And I think what we bring up with like even, well, interesting enough, and you probably saw like even in the literature around some of these retrospective or prospective studies in female bodybuilders, that there's actually very little lean body mass that happens in natural females, more so in males, because there's a bigger impact on the hormonal front with testosterone declining. But for the natural females, it actually seems like muscle retention is actually pretty good. I've always kind of wondered too if that was because just females are set up to handle a bit more volume and have a greater recoverability than males as well. Maybe so. But, you know, with that being said, muscle retention, right? I think the big thing here is like if you had past client data, that would be really important to know of, okay, what did they look like on stage? How, was that contest ready? If not, how long did they prep for, and how many additional weeks might we need to figure in? And then that might give you at least a framework to work with to where you don't run into the issue of not giving someone enough time. Because that is the number one thing why someone does not get ready in time, is not getting enough weeks on prep. Then from there, it's fatigue management is the second reason, because they can't see out the deficit because of fatigue, and then adherence becomes an issue. So I would say that would be the first thing. Like, look through your past client data and see maybe how many weeks that person needs, and if they had big drops in training performance or not. And if so, then we might need to go slower. So going back to actually like the new client, like I've never even prepped this person before. I'll do my best to try to estimate, like, hey, what body fat's at, where it needs to get to, and then add in some additional weeks. And for the female, I'll usually calculate it that we're going to go at like a 0.5% body weight loss per week. I'll calculate it at that, but I will try to move faster. So at the tail end of prep, where we could slow down fat loss, I'll allow that to slow down. But for like I know in the research you'll say like, hey, 1% body weight loss per week, like this is very reasonable and for retaining muscle. But to actually get that for most females, it just doesn't happen. I don't see that rate of fat loss, maybe on the front end of a prep, but as it goes, it usually slows down quite a bit. Like even to drop a pound off a female is like very hard sometimes. So I'll calculate it a lot longer. And so it gets a little daunting, I think, when I tell females like, yeah, this is going to be a 25-week prep. But if you look at a lot of preps where people actually get in shape, easily that, or they did a 16-week prep and they actually didn't get in shape till they did their second or third show of the year. And then you added up how many weeks they actually dieted for. Oh, look, it's like 25 weeks or 28 weeks long. So I think that is the biggest piece of it. And if you give someone enough time in a less aggressive deficit, they're going to uphold their training performance a lot better. Yep. And training performance is the number one thing to uphold to retain tissue. So that would be my big one. Like watch training performance like a hawk, because that's everything that you'll need for muscle retention. But again, at some point, like if someone gets lean enough and it's that far away from their set point and maybe they didn't account for the lifestyle aspects we talked about earlier, training might take more of a detriment. And in turn, you might have lean mass start taking a detriment as well. So that's at least like how to manage that to where you could set someone up for the best ability to not let that happen. But again, our main goal, right, is getting on stage, be lean. So you might have to accept training performance detriment, some lean mass loss, and that's the reality of it. And I think there's really hard for a few people that are very emotionally bought into training. I've had people that will add in refeed days on their own just because they want to uphold their training, and they end up not getting lean enough because they're overly focused on training or overly focused on training that they can't allow their numbers to drop to where like I got to hit my deadlift numbers or my squat numbers or whatever it may be. And they just train harder or really bad form and create more fatigue and more of an issues to resolve and more days you have to pull them out of their deficit to kind of restored. So that's again like why I think it's so important. Like you're in some way have as close eyes on your clients like training as you can, because that'll be the big piece to also uphold muscle on prep.
Aiming for a 1% to 0.5% of body weight per week. Now, when you're saying 1% of body weight per week, we're obviously not accounting for like that total percent that we're aiming for is going to be fat. It's just weight.
Sure. Yeah.
So when you're trying to aim for, let's say, we want to drop for 20% body fat to 10% body fat, and you sort of calculate, okay, how much of this actually is equivalent to actual body fat and not just weight? How do you approach that when it comes to body fat or body weight percentage loss per week and ensuring that you're actually getting to that 10% body fat?
Right. Yeah. So when I do like break down those numbers, and I'll say, all right, so say it's a bodybuilder, I assume it's going to be 3% fat. And most people might not even hit that, but I want to overestimate it. So let's assume that they're going to be down to like this 4% body fat. And they start at whatever, 13% body fat. So we'll do easy math. They have 10% body weight to pull down or body fat to lose. What I do is I usually account for like another 2 to 3% to come off, which is about 25% ish. I just add that on. So if it's like this 200-pound male has 10% body fat to lose, that's 20 pounds. Then we add on. So let's assume it's going to be 25 pounds. And there's a few things that'll pull off there initially, right? You lower someone's food, it's just less GI weight. And so immediately there's a drop there. Also, there's going to be a drop in like glycogen level and water levels. That's going to drop. Those will keep declining a bit on prep too. So you're not going to have someone that's going to be as glycogen full as they were in the off season. And so I don't get overly stuck on a weight number to hit either. You're like, all right, this guy needs to be down to 175 pounds, because if you get focused on that, you might lose sight of those other areas that you're not accounting for weight loss to drop. So yeah, I'll usually tack on like another 2 to 3% on that estimate. And then on that too is, once I break down the weeks, I add in another 2 weeks on top of it, because I have 1 week of peak week. I don't count someone dieting during that. Then I have one extra week I'll count for. That'll just be, maybe it's deload, diet break. Maybe that doesn't even need to happen, but there's absolutely going to be days where I'll have someone where like, hey, take a full rest day today, or we're add food in today, to where you're going to have some time where you're not actively having fat loss occur. So I account for those weeks as well. And that's when you get someone that actually has the 25-week prep. It's because you've tried to account for all those things along the way. So yeah, that's how I relatively account for that. And again, like I said, like if you taking a client through a prep, like it's much better when you already have like that data present, and you'll have some like decent numbers mapped out of where you need to take someone to, and where they're starting at as well.
Refeed days for you are something that you use cautiously, especially because that could go very positively for a lot of clients, but it could also be very, very negative for other clients. Like just pull that trigger on hunger levels, or just going to the binge route. So how do you sort of navigate through adding refeeds in a way that it's not going to be detrimental? Obviously, this is going to be client dependent, and you sort of start seeing the person's relationship with food and how do they respond. But what would be your kind of main approach to see whether it is appropriate for that specific client to add a diet break or a refeed day?
Yeah. If we ever get to our over and underrated part, I would say refeeds are a bit overrated if we had to classify them. For one, my mind is always on like getting the client stage ready, body fat low. So refeeds, there needs to be a good rationale before I add one in. On the front end of a prep, when someone's initially dieting, they're not getting to a point where like glycogen depletion is an issue and they're like going to have poor training. Like muscle retention is going to be really good. It's okay to be a little flat. Like I don't refeed someone based on being flat. And so if training's going well and fat loss is on track, there's not really a rationale to bring in a refeed. And we even know, like off the research we've seen, like very short-term increases in calories don't seem impactful that much in changing like metabolic or hormone processes that are just going to be declining either way once you go back into that next day of a deficit. So what I have found on the front end of a prep is the biggest issue is going to be output. So rather than giving someone more food in a day, I rather give someone a day with less output and the same diet. Okay. And so I'll have days where we just, hey, no cardio today, don't worry about your steps, just rest. And so in turn, the energy balance shifts up a bit more positive on that day, and dropping off that fatigue is huge. Now, as you get farther into a prep, the other part of the equation weighs in. Someone's getting farther like glycogen depleted, they're getting flat. And as long as fat loss is on track, if I'm starting to see gym performance drop off, because we need to think about this muscle retention aspect too, we brought up, that's when I'll start having refeeds that'll come in place to uphold muscle tissue through training performance. And how do I manage that around the client base of not letting someone go binge? And you're right, it's going to be very, very client dependent. So it's, assessing the client off the front end of what their past experiences were dieting, if they have struggled with food. But typically, I also like to use these days as practice trial days for starting to strategize for when we get to peak week. And so seeing what that response is, So I typically like just to bring up the normal foods that someone's eating throughout the day. And it's less likely that someone wants to go binge on the same foods that they're eating every day anyway. You know, if it's just bringing up rice or some fruits and things that we might be using on peak week anyway, most are okay with that. It's been rare that I've seen. It's usually the person where if you add in something like real hyper palatable, or like, hey, go eat, even it's sushi could be enough to like spur someone on. Just that change could be the difference. Some people are completely fine with it though. So it's one where like first like gauge the client, get their feedback on like what their comfortability is with food increases, and then kind of build it off there from their response. Like I had a client one time, he was a very like extrovert, social guy. It was really important for him to go out with his wife on like these date nights, and he hasn't been doing date nights because he's been in prep, and the fatigue was crazy high, and he's like, hey, like I really need to go out and have this meal off plan date night, and we did it, and it completely manageable for him, not an issue. But just the stress relief, the mental drop, we saw like better sleep that night, like the stress reduction and all the fat loss that had been occurring the whole time was just, and the water was retaining it, like all dropped off and came into fruition. So like for that client, like going out just to have that one meal that was the surplus or the refeed, if you want to call it, was beneficial. For the other client though, right, they go eat something off plan in one meal, and oh man, it turn into a binge. So it just yeah, it depends on what they need and what's going to bring about the most benefit. Is it just a psychological break from prep, or is there actually like just a physiological aspect around bringing up glycogen levels? And to that client, they're checked into the prep, and it doesn't matter either way. Like, hey, give me sushi, give me more rice throughout the day. Like, I'll just do what needs to be done. So it varies so much. But I think there's just a lot of assessment that needs to take place and keeping a close relationship with your client so you can read through those.
Maybe like providing specific guidelines around the foods you want them to use for refeeds. So you keep it bland, you don't go overboard, you're just going to have more of what you already have in your dieting phase, but just more calories. But don't go YOLO or try to eat whatever you want, because that could just trigger more of an issue. But you mentioned as well, like it is client dependent. Some clients will be fairly fine if they just go out, have an off meal. But do you tend to pay a lot of attention to the amount of calories that off meal has, or you would say, hey, just be mindful, try to be cautious about the portion size, but don't worry too much about the calories you have? Especially because if you do eat out, sometimes it's hard to guesstimate. You can just add a 20% tax on top of it to overestimate, but you could always be falling behind or like not be accurate with estimation. So what do you tend to recommend? More of those foods and calculate or track, or just let it go?
Either way, like people that are coming to me usually they want to do high level competition, right? They're trying to go like very far in this, and they're asking me to put them on stage. So I am not going to be that flexible. Like my main goal is to have this day for the purpose that's needed for, and then get right back to active fat loss. So I don't want a day then I'm going to have to dig them back down for another 4 days just to make up for it. So it is pretty strict and regimented. So I will give them, by this point in prep, I'll pretty much have everyone on a meal plan, and we're not doing like macro matching and that flexibility, because I need to see predictable response based on foods being utilized within a reason. I've had some clients that give more flexibility too, but in general, when I do a refeed day, it's specific. Here's the meals to eat throughout the day with more of this type of food. So it's already well structured out. If it is a client that's going to go out and eat, I could prompt like, hey, where do you like to eat? What are foods that you like? And if they tell me, then I'll give them some like specifics of what to do. Like, all right, you could say it's sushi because everyone likes sushi. Go have like 2 sushi rolls, no fried stuff, like no cream cheese, no spicy mayo. Within those confines, have what you like. Or it's like, oh yeah, I like tacos. Like, okay, cool. Go have like 3 fajita tacos, and that would be okay. But I don't. It's rare, I think, on prep, at least that far into prep, where I'd say, yeah, just go eat a meal and enjoy. Don't get me wrong, it's happened, but it's rare. It's super rare, because I also realize the benefit around a meal like that, it's probably more the psychological aspect and not something that's going to bring about like a physical benefit. Weighing in that the psychological translates to the physical sometimes, but I also just am cautious that I don't want to lose that time after the meal for a week of dieting when they might really need it. So I do weigh that in. If it's someone that has that time and like they got ready ahead, yeah, like actually I'm kind of okay doing that. I think that's a great way to make them feel like they're not even in prep anymore. So, but in general, yeah, I would say I should, like, I'm still pretty regimented and telling them the exact amounts to be doing.
All right. Well, I don't want to waste more time and get into the part B, which is overrated, underrated, and mostly strategies around body composition changes, prepping, and everything that we have pretty much been talking about. Now, the first one that I want you to tell me whether it's over or underrated is meal prepping. Is it over or underrated?
Yeah, I guess who you're asking, right? I guess I guess it would be
It could be
underrated.
underrated,
I
if you
suppose.
think so.
It's got to happen. Like I think if you underrate it, um, it's not overrated at all. Like yeah, I think it's super important. Like if you don't have a plan, fail to plan to fail. Like that's what I say. So I think like meal preparation would be huge, and having enjoyability in your meals would be super important too. So if you don't have something planned out, you likely might go eat off plan, and that just can't work. So
Calorie cycling, over or underrated?
it could be overrated depending on who you're talking to. I think calorie cycling extremes is a bit overrated. Not as much though when it's based around like preferences and hunger signaling, because I know like people get hungry on their train days. Well, it's like, oh cool, let's shift some food onto your train days and less on your non-train days, and if that keeps them more adherent, well, that's a great dieting strategy. That's like the base pyramid of your dieting strategy building, right? Like adherence. So I think there's a degree of it, but when it gets to the extremes, I think that's when it gets overrated, and you're looking at this a thing like you might lose more body fat and retain more muscle. I think that's where it gets a bit exaggerated.
Okay. Tracking sodium intake.
To a degree, I would say overrated.
Okay.
Oh, but that's a tough one, because these are hard, Ashford, for me, because it's like I'm having to make like a black and white statement when they're not. But I think, because what I come to mind is the people that weigh out their salt. Is that what you're thinking?
No, just kind of like being very, very focused on everything that has sodium and actually tracking it to not exceed to a certain amount, or just because they think they have to be under certain degree of amount, so they don't start retaining water, or they don't look weak or bloated, or like the worst our clients use when they just retain more fluid.
Oh yeah, definitely overrated in that sense. Like sodium, it's I think some people underdo it, and also consideration for like all the other electrolytes too to balance out with sodium is what's important. It's not just the one electrolyte that matters. So I encourage people to like increase salting on their foods. I think a lot of people need, especially like the area that I deal with competitors. A lot of people underdo salt.
Tracking low-calorie things in prep, like artificial sweeteners, sugar-free maple syrup, chewing gum that is sugar-free, spices, overrated or underrated?
I think it's overrated if you standardize that at the beginning of your prep and you're good about not altering that much. Also, if you're an individual that has a lot of food, it's probably very minor. I think it's underrated. See, I'm not going to give you a clear statement on these. For the person that's going to keep increasing those through a prep, and also that has a very, very low calorie set point, all those things add up to be a lot. So I think it's very, very person dependent, whether it's under or overrated. One time I had a client I went out to eat with, and gosh, I hope she doesn't listen. Anyway, she was using all these packets of Splenda, sucralose, which I forget what it was, Splenda. Well, they add dextrose to those, and it's like 0.7 grams of carbohydrate for every little packet, but it says calorie free. I said, hey, how many do you usually use in like this drink or your oatmeal? She'd put like 20 packets in her oatmeal. 20 packets. That's like 14 grams of carbs from packets that are supposed to be calorie free, which, now we're looking at, well, that's like 50 calories for someone that maybe is down to 1,300 calories on a prep. Like, hey, like 100 calories that's a big chunk of your percentage. So that's where it can really start mattering. And it can also really start mattering if you're getting a lot of sugar alcohols too. And that's causing more bloating and digestive issues, especially when you have a female division that's very important for waist control and training the abdomen to like hold your poses. If you're bloated all day, it's going to make it harder for you to train that component. So it depends.
This part is super hard because it depends,
Yeah.
but it could go either way depending on your client, obviously. Now,
you probably want like a rapid fire, right? Overrated, underrated, overrated.
Tracking calories burned, over or underrated?
I would say overrated. Just because the accuracy of tracking can be tough, and so I think it's set your time components and your intensities, and then just more so monitor the weekly weight change, and then adjust off that.
What about insulin on a bulking phase? Under or overrated?
Like exogenous, like injectable insulin?
Yeah.
Definitely overrated. Big time.
Okay.
Yeah, everyone thinks it's like the holy grail of anabolism and growth. It's like not at all. Like it's very much not that. It's just like you use it for diabetics. It's like main role is blood glucose management, but you're also not fixing the insulin resistance from this guy that's probably eating way too much of a surplus. So a lot of people just get really fat using insulin because they're already eating too much. So it's definitely an overrated tool.
Magnesium supplementation, over or underrated?
I would say underrated, actually. And I've been even surprised myself how many people I've come across that their diet looks adequate in magnesium, but they still have like low serum levels and not getting enough. So I would say for a lot of people, it's underrated.
Okay. What about
Would you say
Supersets?
the form could be underrated too? Some people just use like magnesium oxide, which is kind of low bioavailability. So make sure you get like a good bioavailable magnesium.
Talking about Supersets, do you think they're under or overrated? Maybe in prep. Let's put a bit of a more specific.
Yeah, definitely overrated in prep. It's going to make a mess of fatigue for that person, and I would want quality sets to be quality stimulus. And just we know like short rest times between its sets actually just leads to more fatigue and poor hypertrophy outcomes. So yeah, I would definitely say that's an overrated tool.
What about pre-workout meals or snacks?
Overrated.
Okay.
For the most part, I think I'll say for off season, you're never going to go into a training session like glycogen depleted, and you're also usually not training for long durations with that type of volume and burning as many calories as what people think, to where they need that big of a meal prior. In prep, towards the very, very end, nutrient timing would come more important. but I still think it's more of an overrated tool.
BCAAs on fasted cardio.
Yeah, that's definitely an overrated one. Just BCAAs in general are heavily overrated. Might be the most overrated supplement that is just out there.
Okay. What about using L-carnitine to speed up fat loss?
Yeah, yeah. Um, the oral L-carnitine has such a poor bioavailability that it's definitely very much overrated, and I'll leave it. I'll leave it at that. I won't ramble down the metabolic
Because
process. Why?
okay, I hear a lot of the injectable though that is different and is better. Is it true?
Well, you would get 100% bioavailability, like, and part of the oral part, like the gut bacteria, can actually metabolize it into like an actual carcinogen called TMAO, which high TMAO levels are like independent risk factors for like cardiovascular disease. So actually, yep. I would say don't use oral L-carnitine. If you do use injectable, that would be the route to go. However, I still see it being pretty overrated. It's definitely not. It simply is like helps with transporting fatty acids, so it doesn't necessarily increase fatty acid oxidation per se. There's some things around like muscle recovery that's been for, but again, it is not a game changer at all. And to inject L-carnitine, it's very large volumes, and it makes you very sore too. So you're not getting a lot out of it for what you're having to go through. Again, some people want every 1% they can. Then sure, have at it. But I think it's pretty overrated.
Amazing. Okay, I'll ask you two more and I'll let you go. I had a long list, but I'll keep it short. Let me just pick a really good one. I want to see, well, you kind of mentioned meal plans. It seems like you find them that it could be potentially underrated for you or maybe properly rated. What do you think about meal plans for prepping or this kind of situation?
Well, I think, gosh, it depends on the crowd, right? It seems like, at least in the enhanced bodybuilding world, like we're all on meal plans. Like there is no flexibility, but it seems like in the more natural bodybuilding realm that meal plans are like shunned. So I think depending on which crowd you're is, it's probably the truth lies in the middle. So maybe they're underrated in this whatever crowd, and they're probably overrated for the enhanced bodybuilder, because the issue with, and that's what I usually come across, is that it's overrated, that you don't need to be that strict to see out the same goal. And if anything, it would make your process more enjoyable, and you'll have a better, I think a good diet structure was defined good, right? I think it starts with having one that can fill as many nutrient gaps as possible, and that's going to have to be from one that provides a variety of food sources. So if your meal plan is so strict that you're not able to fill in all these micronutrient gaps, you'd have to question, is that a very good diet to begin with? So I think it's an underutilized tool for like that crowd. Also, I use macros and flexibility in my own approach, and I love my diet, and I never feel like I'm struggling to adhere because I can fit so many foods that I do like into it. So it's definitely underutilized, and I think there's a perception that you're not hardcore.
Weighing daily versus weighing monthly, or say, meaning weighing frequency. Weighing daily for you is underrated or overrated?
For my segment, it is, underrated a bit. I do utilize it as quite a tool, but again, this is getting to like where everything matters, to where you need more tracking and more strictness, but I think it's overrated if you don't have that physique goal at that high level. However, I know people that prep that just don't even touch a scale, and that's how they do it, because it does matter, just the visuals, but it can be a helpful tool to utilize to be able to see things that you might not realize in visuals. And it's more so seeing daily fluctuations that might give insight into what happened on that day. Also looking at the averages across time. So it can be helpful, but it can be detrimental too. So depends on the crowd. I'd say, hey, if your lifestyle, it's definitely an overrated thing. You don't need to focus on that. But if you're high level competition, I think it would be underrated a bit if you're just completely avoiding that, because there could be some data to use. Even, man, on peak week, on the day of shows, like I carry my scale around with me, and I weigh myself like before every meal, because I'll know like if my body weight moves up or down. I can also see visuals too and know like at this body weight I am on the money, and if it shifts lower I'm flat. If it shifts higher I start looking more watery. So I know how to bring my body weight back to this point, and I can correlate that very well to a visual too. So yeah, I think it depends, right? But for my crowd, I think I would say it would be underutilized.
Why are these machines that weigh you, like these scales in gyms, and people randomly go and put themselves on and they weigh themselves like at random times? Yes. with I don't understand. Do you know what that is for? Are you still like, I get
no,
it?
I have no idea. I was the spin bikes, like in our gym, they're like there's a scale right in front of them, and I see people like will have their shoes on and like they're drink their shake, they set it down, they like weigh themselves. I'm like, what are you trying to figure out right now? Like it's pointless. And to get to that point too, like I had clients that send me their weight when I don't even ask for it at times that I don't even care about. Like, oh yeah, I did cardio and I lost 2 pounds. I'm like, I don't even care. Like this doesn't matter. So I don't know.
Okay. That was off point. But my last question would be choosing reverse dieting. Is it over or underrated?
In the context of like slowly adding in food, I think that would be overrated. And knowing your crowd, I think you'd say that is overrated. Unless you're someone that got to a point where you're not competing and it's a sustainable maintenance point. And hey, I just want to like maintain this physique, and that's sustainable, like just adding a little bit of food. Hey, that might be just fine. But for the purpose around competition, I'm more for like putting a good amount of food in and putting some body fat on someone quick and getting them more to a sustainable level that they can improve on in the off season. So I would definitely say it's overrated.
Awesome. John, I am so glad we were able to make this happen, and we were able to cover pretty much 95% of what I had planned. So any projects coming up for you, talk to me.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think your background's really cool. Yeah.
I love
like, we have a lot of stuff going on this year. We just opened up J3U coaching and hired on some coaches. So kind of the natural evolution of J3 University, which has been educating coaches. And we have all these great coaches that come through the course, improve their skills, and are just do awesome with clients. And it just has made sense that I can't coach everyone, and I want to be able to help as many people as I can. So to bring on these people that have gone through the course, that have worked under myself and also Luke Miller, who's partners in J3U coaching with me, that the natural evolution was to open J3U coaching. So we launched that actually just 9 days ago. It's been phenomenal. And already have like 7 coaches on board with us. The other thing too is next month we're launching J3U level 2. We're actually going to come out with a physique coach curriculum. a credential, I should say, not a curriculum, but a credential. So we have like our level 1 course. It's all kind of like the informational, the 101 on things. This is 14 weeks of case study work. That's all of our clients. So it's strictly case studies and questions prompt throughout to teach like our thought process and decision making on all the issues you're going to get with a client. So it's the real hands-on part. Has a comprehensive exam at the end, and then they could become J3U PC. So everyone likes credentials after the name, but that will be our credential as J3U physique coach. Not hired on as a coach with us, but being able to hold that credential and have recognition that they've gone through quite a bit of coursework that we have to obtain it. So it's not an easy one to obtain. We're only going to let 50 people in at a time every quarter. So it won't be, we're not trying to push numbers. Like we want like quality people to be able to go through this and really learn and be able to represent us well. So that's the projects and stuff coming out.
Any competition for you?
Yeah, I am 30 weeks out. I'm already counting. I'm going to do the Texas Pro, which I've wanted to do it for a long time. It's one of our, it's such a great production of a show. Like really like now I just try to pick shows where I can get some good stage picks, because sometimes it's terrible when you don't have good stage picks at some of these shows, but they do a great show, and that's my home state, Texas. So I'd love to do one here. And so I'll do that. And I've tossed around the idea of competing in Italy, which is like, I think it's 4 weeks after.
Okay.
Just because I've never done an international competition. So I realized it'd be challenging with travel and not knowing food and stuff. But man, it would just be cool to go to Italy and then like hang out in Italy after the show.
I will let you go. I appreciate you, John. It was awesome to have this conversation with you. Thank you again for your amazing presence, for your, I don't know, you're amazing overall.
Well,
so
thanks
thank you so much
for
for
having
coming.
me. You had great questions. It's always a really good conversation with you.
Have a great night, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, bye.